The fire had already gone out by the time Owen found the clearing. He had come through the Greyvale forest that morning to check his fence line, not to find anything. But the smell stopped him. Ash and something underneath it, older, heavier. He pushed through the burned trees and stood in the middle of what had once been a dragon nest. Everything in it was dead. Scorched wood, cracked stone, the blackened remains of what might have been eggshells. The Vreth patrol had been through 3 days ago. People in Greyvale were still talking about the smoke they saw arising from the forest edge. Owen almost turned back. Then he saw it. One egg, tucked under a collapsed branch at the far side of the clearing. Pale cream color, small for a dragon egg, no bigger than a wash basin. He walked over and put his hand on it. Cold, almost certainly dead. He stood there a long time. The forest was very quiet. He carried it home inside his coat. His daughter Dara was 16 and sharp-eyed, and she looked at him like he had lost his mind. His son Rowan was 9 and looked at the egg like it was the most important thing he had ever seen in his life. Owen set it in the corner near the bread oven, packed straw around it, and said nothing to either of them. 3 weeks later, it hatched. The dragonling that came out was small enough to hold in 2 hands. Her scales were pale gold on her back and ivory white on her belly. She was wet and shaking, and she sneezed twice trying to clear fluid from her nose. Rowan, who had been sleeping next to the oven for the past week waiting, caught her before she could fall. She fit against his chest. She made a sound like a bird learning to sing. Elder Brant came from the village to look at her. He was old enough to have seen dragons before the Vreth came, and he turned her over in his hands the way a farmer checks a newborn animal. He pressed 2 fingers below her jaw, right where the fire glands sat in a healthy dragon. Nothing. Flat and still as river clay. He handed her back to Rowan and told Owen what Owen already half suspected. No fire sac. Born without the trigger mechanism. It happened sometimes with abandoned eggs that went cold. The dragonling would not be dangerous, but she would not be a full dragon either. The old custom was to return her to the wild. Let nature decide. Owen said he understood. He thanked the elder for coming. Then he closed the door and did not return her to the wild. They named her Lyra because Dara said she made sounds like a stringed instrument when she was happy, and Rowan agreed immediately, and Owen pretended he had not already been calling her that in his head for days. She grew fast. By the end of the first year, she was the size of a large dog. By the second, she was horse-sized and helping Rowan herd the goats without being asked, cutting off the strays with an efficiency that made Owen wonder if she was smarter than his dog had ever been. She probably was. She could not breathe fire. When she tried, and she did try sometimes, opening her mouth wide and building up what looked like effort, nothing came out. Dara documented it all in her journal, the gland positions, the breathing patterns, the heat the failed attempts produced. She told Owen once that she thought the mechanism was there, just blocked, like a door with no handle. Owen did not know what that meant, but he told her to keep writing it down. Lyra did not seem bothered by what she could not do. She was bothered by other things. By the Vreth patrol vehicles that rolled down the road past the farm twice a month now. By the way Owen's shoulders went up whenever he heard them. By the way Dara stopped talking when a drone passed over the fields. She would press close to Rowan when the patrols went by. He would put his arm over her neck and she would hold still, watching the road until the sound faded. One evening in her second autumn, a patrol stopped at the farm gate. 2 soldiers and a record keeper with a data tablet. They wanted a census count. People, animals, any creatures of note. Owen stood at the gate with his hands loose at his sides and his voice flat and cooperative and listed everything. Goats, 12. Dog, 1. Ox, 1. 1 large domestic animal, working livestock, kept for hauling. The record keeper looked past Owen's shoulder at the pale gold shape standing in the barn doorway. Lyra looked back. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She just watched with amber eyes that caught the late light and gave nothing away. The record keeper typed something. The patrol moved on. Owen walked back to the barn. Lyra pushed her nose against his chest hard enough to rock him back a step. He put both hands on the side of her face and held on. Good girl, he said quietly. Good girl. Neither of them slept well that night. The trouble arrived on paper first, the way most trouble does. Captain Aldrich of the Vreth Dominion was not the kind of man who shouted or threatened in the first meeting. He was the kind who sat down, opened a folder, and read from it in a level voice. He had arrived in Greyvale 3 months ago with a new unit and a new set of orders. And in those 3 months, he had reorganized the tax schedule, updated every census registry, and begun what the Dominion called an asset evaluation program. The people of Greyvale called it something shorter and uglier. Dara had been watching the program from a distance, the way she watched everything, carefully, in writing, with her feelings set aside until she had facts to attach them to. She monitored the Vreth public broadcast channels on a receiver she had rebuilt from salvaged parts. She learned their data formats. She learned which transmissions were routine and which were flagged. It took her most of a year. What she found, when she finally broke into the administrative logs, was straightforward and horrible. Every creature flagged as having military or industrial value in the Greyvale census region had been entered into a secondary database. Dragons were at the top of the list. Below them, large draft animals with unusual traits, certain birds used by the Resistance for messaging, 2 horses that ran faster than Vreth scanners expected. None of the creatures in that database had been seen again after their assessment dates. She told Owen at the kitchen table after Rowan was asleep. She put her journal open in front of him, the notes laid out clearly. Owen read everything without speaking. When he finished, he closed the journal and sat with his hands flat on the table for a long time. They filed a report on her, Doris said. After the census visit last autumn, the scout who came through in winter, he updated it. She's in the database. Owen looked at the wall. Outside, in the barn, they could hear the soft sound of Lyra shifting in the straw. What's the flag say? Dara had memorized it. Non-standard specimen. Priority dissection for fire gland study. The word dissection sat between them like something with weight. Rowan did not know yet. He was out in the field with Lyra most of the day, the two of them doing the quiet work they had always done together, checking fence posts, watching the sky, lying in the grass in the late afternoon with Lyra's tail curled loosely around Rowan like a boundary marker. He talked to her constantly. She listened with the focused stillness of something that understood more than it let on. Dara had been studying Lyra seriously for over a year. Her notes filled 2 full journals. She knew the placement of every scale on Lyra's back, the exact temperature of her breath on a cold morning, the way her pupils narrowed in strong light. She knew that Lyra's internal temperature ran consistently higher than it should, the kind of heat that had nowhere to go because the exit point never opened. She had a theory. She had not told anyone because theories without proof felt dangerous to say out loud. The summons arrived on a Tuesday. A Vreth messenger on a motorized runner came up the farm road and handed Owen a folded document with a seal pressed into the corner. Owen opened it in the yard. The messenger waited. Report to Greyvale Assessment Station with biological asset registered under Census ID 7GV114 within 7 days. Failure to comply will result in civic penalty proceedings. Owen folded the document. He thanked the messenger. He went inside and put the document on the table. That night, Lyra woke the household by pressing her nose against Owen's bedroom door until he opened it. She had never done that before. He followed her to the barn window, where she stood very still, staring up. A Vreth scanning drone hovered just above the tree line, its lights off, its sensors running quiet. Owen put his hand on Lyra's neck. She did not move or make a sound. She just watched it the same way she had watched the patrol at the gate, still, steady, giving nothing. The drone moved on after a few minutes. Rowan appeared in the barn doorway in his nightclothes, rubbing his eyes. What's happening? Nothing, Owen said. Go back to sleep. Rowan looked at Lyra, who looked back at him. Some communication passed between them that Owen could not read. Rowan nodded and went back inside. Owen stayed in the barn until dawn. Lyra stayed with him. In the morning, Owen sent a message to a man named Sorrel, who worked as a warden in the outer settlements and who everyone in the region understood to be someone you contacted when official channels had failed you. Owen had never contacted him before. He wrote the message in the plain, careful language of a man who had run out of other options. He had 6 days left on the summons. He spent the first one fixing the fence line, because the goats still needed tending and because he did not know what else to do with his hands. Lyra walked beside him the whole morning, her shoulder bumping gently against his arm every few steps. He did not explain to her what the paper said. He suspected she already knew. Sorrel met Owen on the road 2 days after the message, as if he had been expecting it. He was a lean, weathered man with a warden's quiet about him. the kind of quiet that came from years of watching the forest instead of talking at it. He did not shake Owen's hand or waste time. He looked at the summons document, folded it back up, and handed it over. "You already know what it means," he said. "Yes," Owen said. "Then you already know what your choices are." Owen knew. Comply and lose Lyra. Run and try to reach the southern continent before the Vreth found them. The southern lands were unsurveyed, mostly wilderness, and the Dominion had not bothered with them yet. A dragon could live there. A family could follow. It was a bad plan, but it was the only one. Sorrel's network was small and careful. 3 other families in the outer settlements, 2 former rangers, a woman who ran a supply boat from the river dock in Greyvale town. Not soldiers, not fighters. People who moved quietly and knew the roads and owed each other favors. They had never won anything yet. They were honest about that. But the boat was real. The southern route was real. And Sorrel knew a way through the forest that avoided every Vreth checkpoint between the farm and the river dock. "For nights," Sorrel said. "Move on the 5th, reach the dock before dawn on the 6th. They moved out on the 5th night, an hour after dark. Owen led the ox with the supply cart. Dara walked beside it. Rowan rode on Lyra's back because she was quieter than the cart, and he weighed almost nothing to her. Sorrel was ahead of them on the path, and 2 of his people were behind. Nobody spoke. The forest was dark and smelled of wet soil and pine. Lyra moved without sound, her pale scales dulled by the mud Dara had rubbed over them earlier that day. Rowan lay flat along her neck, eyes open, watching the canopy. She felt him and slowed when he tensed and moved when he relaxed. They had been reading each other for 3 years. It was its own language. For 3 nights it worked. On the 6th night, an hour from the dock, a Vreth rapid response unit came out of the trees from 3 directions at once. They used lights and noise and numbers, the way they always did, overwhelming on purpose. 2 soldiers grabbed the ox's harness and stopped the cart. More moved in from the sides. Owen raised his hands before anyone told him to. Sorrel shouted something, and his people scattered into the dark. Dara did not scatter. She stood her ground, and they grabbed her by the arm. Rowan slid off Lyra's back fast, instinctively, and ran into the tree line because she shoved him. Not hard, just a single push with her nose, the way she had pushed Owen out of the way of a startled goat once. Deliberate, directed. Lyra looked at the soldier holding Dara. Then she looked at the one moving toward Rowan's direction. Then she looked at Owen, who was on his knees in the road with a weapon at the back of his head. She held very still. Rowan was already 20 meters into the dark. He stopped when he realized she was not behind him. He turned back. "Lyra," he whispered. She looked at him. She jerked her head, the same motion she used when she wanted him to move away from the fence during goat cutting. "Go. Move. Now." He understood. He had always understood her. He ran. She watched him disappear into the trees. Then she turned back to the soldiers, calm and enormous and unreadable, and let them put a restraint rope around her neck, because the alternative was to fight in the dark with Owen on his knees 10 steps away and Dara held by someone who looked like they would not hesitate. She let them walk her. She did not pull against the rope. She let them think they had her. Captain Aldrich arrived from Greyvale in a vehicle 20 minutes later. He looked at Owen, at Dara, at the rope around Lyra's neck. He looked into the forest where Rowan had gone. He turned to his sergeant. "Find the boy." Then he looked back at Lyra, who looked back at him with amber eyes that held nothing he could read. A new order had come through that afternoon. General Marev, the Dominion's supreme commander on Aerith, had flagged the Lyra case himself after reading Aldrich's last report. He was personally traveling to Greyvale. He considered a free dragon in the region a symbol problem, not just a logistics problem. If the specimen cannot be contained, the order read, "It is to be destroyed." Aldrich folded that order and put it in his coat pocket and did not share it with Owen. Owen and Dara were loaded into a transport. Lyra was led behind on the rope, steady and quiet and patient, her eyes on the dark tree line the whole way into Greyvale. Somewhere in the forest, Rowan was running, and she knew exactly which direction he was running in. She remembered it. She would need it later. Rowan ran until his lungs burned, then walked until he could run again. He was 9 years old and alone in the Greyvale forest in the dark, and he was not crying. He would think about that later and understand that he had not cried because there was no room for it. His mind was entirely full of the next step, and the step after that, and the question of where Lyra was. She found him before dawn. He heard her first, not footsteps. She was too careful for that, but the sound of something large breathing very slowly behind him. He turned, and she was there in the gray pre-light between the trees, her pale scales the color of old ash, her eyes catching nothing because there was no light to catch yet. He put his arms around her neck. She stood still and let him. "Okay," he said into her scales. "Okay, we have to move." She moved. The next 2 days were the hardest and also, in a way that Rowan would not be able to explain for years, the clearest he had ever felt. There was no school, no schedule, no list of things to worry about that did not matter. There was the forest and the drones and Lyra and the problem of staying alive and out of sight until Sorrel found them. Lyra did things Rowan had not known she could do. She found a limestone ridge above a shallow river and stopped there, pressing her body against the pale rock. She looked at Rowan and then at the mud at the waterline, then back at him. He understood. They spent an hour covering her scales and river clay until she looked like a boulder on the slope of a boulder field. A drone passed overhead twice. It did not stop. She caught fish with her front claws, standing motionless in the shallows until something swam within reach. She was fast. Rowan built a fire with the kit in his coat pocket, small and low, tucked under a rock overhang where the light would not carry. He cooked the fish badly and ate every bite. At night she curled around him. She was warm, not like a blanket, but like sitting near a kiln, a deep, steady heat that came from inside her. He had known this about her since he was small, that she was warmer than she should be. Now, in the cold forest night, he understood it differently. She was not cold because nothing in her had ever gone out. He talked to her the way he always had, steady, quiet, as if continuing a conversation already in progress. "They have Dad and Dara," he said. "Sorrel got away, I think. He knows the forest better than them." He paused. "You let them take you in the road. I saw. You could have run." Lyra breathed slowly. Her exhale was warm on the top of his head. "You came back for me instead," he said. "Didn't you?" She made the low sound, the one from when she was small and warm and safe. Sorrel found them on the second afternoon. He came from the north with a woman named Betta, who was one of his people and who moved through undergrowth without disturbing it. He crouched down to Rowan's level and looked him over and then looked at Lyra. "You're both in better shape than I expected," he said. "She kept us hidden," Rowan said. Sorrel looked at Lyra for a moment longer. She looked back, steady as always. He had never fully trusted her, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was a thing he did not understand, and Sorrel trusted what he understood. But he had been watching her for 2 days now, the way she moved, the way she read Rowan, the way she had clearly made a decision at the roadblock and executed it. He was revising his understanding. "There's a boat," he told Rowan. "River dock in Greyvale. That hasn't changed. But we have a problem." The problem had arrived that morning. General Marev was in Greyvale. His personal transport had come in from the eastern station, and he had taken over the administrative building. He had brought 12 soldiers with him, in addition to Aldrich's unit. He had also, according to Betta, who had a contact inside the building, reviewed the Lyra file himself and added a destruction order. "He said a fireless dragon is a curiosity," Betta said quietly, "but a free dragon is a symbol." Rowan went very still. The dock was on the south edge of Greyvale town. To reach it they had to move through the occupied zone, past the checkpoints, through the back streets, into the port district. With Lyra, "We could cover her again," Rowan said. "In a town with electric lights?" Sorrel said. "She helped us hide in the forest. She'll help us hide in the town." Rowan's voice was not a child asking for permission. It was a child reporting what he knew. "She just needs to know what we're doing. She understands everything you tell her." Sorrel looked at Lyra again. She was watching him with those amber eyes that had no performance in them. No desperation, no aggression. Just attention and patience, and something underneath both of those things that he was only starting to name. "When do we move?" Rowan asked. Sorrel pulled out his map. "Tonight. Late. After the second patrol rotation." Rowan put his hand on Lyra's shoulder. She shifted her weight slightly into the touch. "She'll do it," he said. "She just needs a reason." He looked at her. "We have to get to them. Dad and Dara. That's the reason." Lyra turned her head toward the direction of Greyvale and stood very still, scenting the air. Her jaw was warm. He could feel it from where he sat. Not hot, not burning, just present. The way a fire is present behind a closed door. Waiting. They dressed Lyra in canvas. It was Betta's idea, broad flat sacks strapped across her back and sides, stuffed with straw to add bulk and change her shape. From a distance, at night, she looked like an overloaded pack animal. Rowan sat on top of the whole arrangement, hunched small, wrapped in a drover's coat 2 sizes too large. Sorrel walked ahead. Betta walked behind. They came into the south edge of Greyvale through a narrow equipment lane used by market traders, where the lights were worst and the paving was too broken for patrol vehicles to move fast. 2 streets, then 1 street, then half a street. The dock entrance was ahead, a wide gate with a single Vreth guard post on the left. Sorrel had timed the rotations. They had 6 minutes between the guards' check-ins. They were 4 minutes away when a soldier stepped out of a side doorway and shone a lantern upward at Lyra's face. He had her census image on his scanner. He looked at the image and looked at her and looked at the image again. Then he yelled. The floodlights came on, 6 of them, rigged on poles from the last Vreth infrastructure project, blazing white and filling the whole street. Sorrel grabbed Betta and pushed her sideways into a door. Betta's contact, waiting by the dock gate, disappeared instantly. The canvas sacks on Lyra's back slid as she shifted, and Rowan pressed flat against her neck and held on. Soldiers moved in from both ends of the street. Not running. Walking with the steady confidence of a unit that had trained for this, that had numbers and firepower and knew it. Then a vehicle came from the far end, a heavy command transport, and it stopped in the middle of the road. General Marev stepped out. He was a large man, broad in the way that Vreth officers who had seen combat were broad, and he wore his rank plainly. He looked at the street, at the blocked exits, at the soldiers in position, and then at Lyra. She was standing in the middle of the floodlit road in half-falling canvas with Rowan flat on her back, and Marev looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided is not a problem. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not a performance. This, he said to Aldrich, who had appeared at the edge of the light, is what they told me was a symbol problem. He gave a signal, and 2 soldiers on the far side of the crowd brought Owen and Dara out from the transport behind him. Owen had his hands bound. Dara had a cut above her eye from the road ambush, dried dark. They were both upright. Marev looked at them, then at Lyra, then at Rowan. He was a man who understood leverage. Collect the boy, he said. Let the parents watch. Then the dragon. He said the last part simply, the way you say you are going to put out a lamp. The soldier raised his weapon and pointed it at Owen. Rowan screamed. The fire came out white. Not orange. Not the muddy yellow of a young dragon's first flame. White at the core and gold at the outer edge, and it came out at volume. A sustained column of heat that hit the heavy weapon equipment to Marev's left and melted the housing instantly. The soldiers nearest it stumbled backward. The 2 floodlights on that side shattered from the heat pressure, and the street went half dark. Lyra pulled in breath and screamed. Not the fire scream, a different sound entirely. Something between a war horn and a thing in tremendous pain and tremendous relief at the same time. The remaining windows on both sides of the street broke inward. Soldiers covered their ears. The guard post at the dock gate simply crumpled, one wall buckling from the vibration. She was breathing hard. Fire still ran in thin lines along her jaw, faint and gold, like lit seams in pale stone. Her whole frame was shaking, not from fear, from the effort of containing 3 years of stored heat and then releasing it in 10 seconds. She turned. She burned a path, not at soldiers, not at Marev, at the restraints on Owen's wrists. Precise. The binding cord smoked and fell. Owen pulled Dara close. Marev had not moved. He stood in the road with his sidearm drawn, watching her, and his face was not the face of a man who was afraid. It was the face of a man recalculating. The remaining soldiers held position, waiting for his order. Dara stepped out from behind Owen. Her voice came out flat and steady, which was the most frightening way it ever sounded. You flew across this planet, she said to Marev, to collect one fireless dragon. She let that sit in the air for a moment. You've never dealt with humans before, have you? Marev's jaw was tight. He raised the sidearm. Lyra turned to face him, and the gold light along her jaw lines brightened. Rowan, still on her back, put one hand flat against the back of her neck. She felt it. She held still. The street was silent except for the sound of cooling metal and settling glass. Aldrich stood at the edge of the light with his arms at his sides, and he was not reaching for his weapon. Marev fired. The shot hit Lyra in the left shoulder. She rocked slightly to the right. The gold light along her jaw flickered but did not go out. A thin line of blue-black blood ran down through her ivory scales and hit the paving stones. She looked at Marev. He looked at her. She did not breathe fire at him. She used her tail. It came around low and fast and swept his legs out cleanly. He went down hard on his back, sidearms skittering across the road stones. Before he could move, the broad flat weight of her tail was across his chest, not crushing, not burning, just there, holding him with the calm precision of an animal that had spent 3 years practicing exactly this level of force on a 9-year-old boy in a field while being careful not to hurt him. Marev reached for the sidearm. Lyra's tail shifted 6 inches. He stopped. She put her face close to his. Her breath was warm. The fire had dropped back below visible, but he could feel it radiating off her jaw like an open oven from 3 feet away. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she lifted her tail and stepped back. Aldrich walked forward from the edge of the light. He moved past Marev, who was sitting up slowly, and he stopped in the middle of the road. He did not draw his weapon. He looked at his soldiers and made a short, flat gesture. They lowered theirs. He turned to Owen. "I am going to file a full report," he said. "I want you to understand that. This incident, the dragon, all of it. Accurately." Owen looked at him. "Why?" Aldrich glanced at the melted equipment to his left, the broken windows, the crumpled guard post at the dock gate. He looked at Lyra, who was now standing beside Rowan with her head lowered to his level, making the low sound while he pressed both hands against her jaw and talked to her quietly. "Because what happened here changes the variables," Aldrich said, "and the Dominion needs accurate variables." It was not an apology. It was not kindness. It was the statement of a professional who had just watched his operational assessment become incorrect in a very loud and expensive way, and who intended to say so clearly to his superiors. He picked up Marev's sidearm from the road, checked it, and pocketed it. "Get your family off this street," he said to Owen. Then he walked back to his position and did not say anything else. Sorrel emerged from the doorway where he and Beta had taken cover. He looked at the street, at Lyra, at the retreating soldiers beginning to clear equipment from the road. His expression was the expression of a man who had been keeping very careful score for 4 years and had just watched the count change. He crossed to Owen and said nothing. He put his hand briefly on Owen's arm. That was enough. They did not take the boat that night. Marev's people were still in the port district, and the timing was wrong. Instead, Sorrel moved the family to a house in the outer settlement owned by one of his network, a small stone building set back from the road behind a stand of old trees. Lyra lay in the yard. Dara cleaned the wound on her shoulder by lantern light, flushing it with boiled water, packing it with cloth until the bleeding slowed. Lyra held perfectly still and watched Dara work with the patient attention of an animal that understood it was being helped. "I was right," Dara said quietly, more to herself than anyone. The mechanism was there, just waiting. Rowan sat beside Lyra's head and held her ear gently between both hands the way he had since she was small. "I knew," he said. Dara looked at him. "I always knew she could," he said. "She just hadn't needed to yet." In the following weeks, the Vreth presence in Greyvale did not disappear. Nobody had expected it to, but it became quieter, more careful. Assessment orders stopped coming for the outer settlements. The drone flights over the Greyvale forest reduced to once a week, then once a month. 3 weeks after the night in the street, Captain Aldrich transferred his unit to the Eastern Station and was replaced by a younger officer who spent his first 2 weeks doing nothing but updating census records. General Marev was recalled to Dominion Central Command for what the official announcement called a review of field operations. He did not return to Aerith. Word moved through the settlements the way word always moved, slowly, imperfectly, gaining detail it did not have and losing detail it did. But the shape of it stayed true. A fireless dragon in Greyvale had ignited. She had not attacked soldiers. She had protected her family and then stood over the most powerful Vreth officer on the planet and looked at him, and then let him go. People argued about what that meant. Sorrel did not argue. He organized. Owen went back to the farm. The fence still needed mending. 2 months later, On a clear evening in late autumn, Dara sat at the table by the window with 3 new journals, writing. Owen worked in the yard. Rowan was asleep in the barn, curled against Lyra's side with a blanket that had slid halfway off him, as it always did. Lyra was awake. She lay with her eyes open, watching the tree line in the last of the light. The wound on her shoulder had closed into a pale scar. The gold light was gone from her jaw most of the time now. She had learned, the way she learned everything about herself, that she did not need to hold it close to the surface to know it was there. She was not watching for anything specific. She was just watching. The way she had always watched, from the first winter she had stood in the barn doorway and tracked a wreath drone across the sky. Nothing moved at the tree line. The goats were settled. The farm was quiet. Rowan's blanket slid further. He did not wake. Lyra curved her tail around him, slow and gentle, and tucked the edge of the blanket back into place. She had been doing it all his life. She would keep doing it. That was the whole of it. Really, the simplest possible version of the thing she was. She watched the tree lean. She kept watch. She had always been keeping watch.